Welcome to the CURES show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness. Are your kids overscheduled? Do all those activities really help with success, or is it just leading to burnout? Child psychologist Dr. Saunders from the Institute of Living in Hartford is here with us now. Welcome, Dr. Saunders.
Hello, Kara. Thank you for having me.
So I think parents, we all think we're stressed. How do we know if our kids are burning out?
Well, I think that there's like several steps to this process. And one of the steps is really looking at what kind of a day-to-day schedule do our children have. And also it's knowing your children. Some children do better with a little more structure. Some children do better with more downtime. One of the points that I wanted to make is that all children need downtime, because that's where in that downtime, or that leisure time, I think leisure time is more a term we would use for adults, but in that downtime, that's where you get creative. You think, oh, maybe I'll pick up a book, or maybe I'll play outside, or maybe, it's in those activities that it really fuels our creative mind. So, but knowing that some kids need some structure. So I'm not saying let's eliminate structure.
Yeah. But the importance, we often talk about, trying to get them in athletics and making sure they're doing their homework and doing all this. But leisure time actually needs to go on the planner in our modern world. Like, leisure time is really important for development.
It's important for brain development. It's important for emotional development. It's important for lots of different types of development. And I always harken back, as my colleagues often like to tease me, to the older days, right? The older days when there were no electronics. And, at the end of the school day, once your homework got done, you just went outside and played for a while until it got dark, and then you came inside. So, in summer days were about finding your own fun. There was very few camps and other things. And I'm not saying let's go all the way back to those days, because I think in some situations those were problematic. But having time to interact with kids in the neighborhood, or create a game and make up the rules, and to engage in activities where you explore and do things, and use your brain, and use your social sense of connecting with other people. And I think sometimes that's a little bit of what we're missing. Now, I'm not saying you can't get that if you're joining a team or doing an activity where you are learning to get along with other people, you're learning to work together as a team. So I'm not in any way railing against those kinds of activities. It's just about being more mindful that we don't want our kids to have activities 5 to 7 days a week.
Right. And so I know it can vary per kid, but what you're saying is a lot of important learning, social skills, etc., really goes on when you don't have adult-led structured activities. And that could just be a team or whatever, but they're not getting the same development.
So if we go back to infancy and early childhood, in infancy and early childhood, the skill that needs to develop is what's called self-soothing. Self-soothing is, I've got nothing stimulating me. What do I do? Do I interact with someone? Do I play with blocks? Do I go walk around the house? Do I play with the cat or dog, right? What do young children, infants have self-soothing too. Infants and young children do to self-soothe. And you take some of those skills, and then you keep adding on developmental layers to them. And what are more sophisticated things you can do to manage your time? Because you think that we always want the skills of children to translate to adulthood. And as adults, we also need to have ways to manage our time. Now, we all need downtime. I need downtime. You need downtime. We all need downtime. But sometimes after a little downtime, it's like, okay, well, I've had my downtime now, and I thought about some things. I had this idea, and now I want to, take on this project. So learning to be okay with your thoughts and your feelings, and that you can manage your emotional state, because that's really what self-soothing is, as in infants and early childhood, is managing your emotional state as well, and then having that advance to other things.
Yeah, thankfully we're becoming more aware. I know in our school district, they talk a lot about emotional regulation and teaching kids to be mindful of their moods and mood meters. I mean, this is not anything that we learned when we were younger, or at least I didn't. So I guess that's a good thing. But when you say downtime, I will say often in my house, if I say let's have downtime, that might mean to them laying on a couch and scrolling. Is that not what you mean?
Well, I do like to be realistic, and it's realistic that that children in this age of devices, handheld devices, phones, and other handheld devices, that is their go-to. It is my hope that they can also, spend some time outside. We're always talking on CURES about get us as adults and young people, getting them outside. I don't care if you have, yes, you can have time on your electronic device, but first you have to go for a walk around the neighborhood, and maybe you'll see something that'll catch your attention and occupy your time. So creating anchor events too that are not just on electronics. I do want young people to learn to manage that time. I would hope that they're not going to spend 8 to 10 hours a day on a snow day or weekend on electronics. In that case, parents would need to step in and say, this is an electronic free time period. Go for a walk outside, go bounce a basketball. I don't care what you do. You have to do something additional with your time. So there would be incidents where parents need to step in those times.
Yeah. How do we know if we're scheduling too much? Because I think that's hard, and we all fall victim sometimes of saying, well, gosh, I'm not doing enough. I mean, so-and-so's doing that, and their kid's doing this, that, and the other. And there's that pressure of I'm not doing enough. And you want us to think, well, maybe you're doing too much.
Well, when we engage in social comparison, that never leads to anything good, because we're looking at our neighbors or our friends saying, oh, their kids are in this and that activity and they're not playing on this advanced team. And so it really is looking at yourself, self as an individual, your relationship with your child, what your child's motivation and expectations are. Because if it's as the adults pushing a lot of events and activities onto our kids, we're going to get pushed back. And that's the information that we need to say, okay, maybe I need to dial it back. There are those highly self-motivated kids that want to be on the robotics team and then join the chess team and join the debate team. And sometimes as they get older, it's us as parents saying, listen, I understand that you like all these things, but you're super tired in the evening and not getting your homework done, or you're really hard to get up in the morning. So maybe all those activities are wearing you down, and really engaging in that dialogue and helping, as a parent, helping your child see when you do X, Y, and Z, A or B happens, right? So that's the cause and effect that we want to teach us as adults, right? Sometimes, in our job, we get a little over involved in something, and I realize, wow, that's really taking away from what I need to do in my main job, or it's making me get home too late to my family. So some of that learning has to take place by doing.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit about there's just the average kids, right? That many of us in this busy Western society might be overscheduling them, and then there's also, say, kids that are not neurotypical. I know in a lot of research with ADHD, they've said sometimes those kids who have a harder time even regulating emotion, or they might have more sensory issues, they actually might not even need more downtime. That is even more crucial for them to have unstructured time.
Yes, and because young people that are neurotypical in any way, we do need to monitor sort of what's effective and what's not effective with them. And those kids might need more downtime, and they might not use the downtime in the way that we as adults want them to use it. And that's hard, right? I too want to direct the down, like, you should be doing this. Why don't you read a book? Why don't you, help me prepare for dinner, whatever it is. And I'm not saying kids don't need to chip in, but at the same time, let's see what happens. If my child takes a break and is on an electronic device for a couple of hours, but then gets up and is a little more energized and more talkative, I'm going to say to myself, okay, well, that way that they spent that activity was helpful for them, right? If it makes them more irritable and moody, then I'm going to say that activity was not so helpful. So some of this is trial and error, and really it's knowing your child, knowing what does and doesn't work for them. And then it doesn't mean we don't push things to the limit and try to see what can be more effective.
Yeah. So I love the idea of anchor events, and this can help parents because I think we're also overscheduled. So then thinking about scheduling or underscheduling our kids is a whole other thing. So you talk about anchor events and how we can kind of keep this simple to maybe dial it back or to make sure we're doing this in a balanced way. What do you mean?
So I talk about anchor events. So anchor events are, even as an adult, right? So sometimes you get a day up of work, it's a Saturday, and you think, oh my God, I have 10 things I need to do and I don't want to do any of them. So I just want to lay in bed. So an anchor event is, okay, I just need to do one thing in the morning and one thing in the afternoon. And then in the evening, I can have it free. And often what happens is once you create that anchor event, and that anchor events are for kids too. And an anchor event could be, I need you to read for 30 minutes, or I need you to walk around the block. I need you to bounce a basketball outside for 15 minutes. That could be the anchor event. And oftentimes what you find in these anchor events is once they engage in them, they can last longer. It's not like they're ticking a clock and it's like, okay, I've had my 15 minutes of bouncing a basketball outside. But it's the anchor event creates a little bit of structure so that you don't have to have, from 10 to 10:30, this is what you're doing. From 10:30 to 11, this is it. From 12 to 12:15, you're eating lunch, right? That's way overscheduled. And that's hard for parents to manage. But to create anchor events, I need you to do this. And the anchor event could be, I need you to do a couple dishes, or I need you to take out the garbage. That's your anchor event. And I'm saying it needs to be done sometime in the afternoon. So it's not like at 1:05 on your back saying you didn't take out the garbage yet. I gave you the afternoon, but it has to be done in the afternoon.
Yeah, I sort of try to do that with, hey guys, feed the cats. And then you get home and you're like, I haven't fed the cats yet. I'm like, well, the cats are really hungry. So maybe we need a smaller window of negotiation. Okay.
Right. Right.
But okay, so the idea that we have these things now, I think kids, especially older kids, let's talk about, I have two teens, right? 13 and 16, but they get a little older and they want to sleep, right? So their anchor event is just getting up to go to school. And then afterward, they would say, okay, I just had school all day. That was structure. Obviously, that's one thing, but I think you're talking about more than that.
Well, but school is actually not just one thing. It's about 6 things, right? It's English class and history class and math class, right? There's a lot that encompasses school, and many kids have some type of after school activity.
Yeah.
So and knowing your child, knowing that yes, my child needs, some kids will come home right away and get their homework done. Some kids need that downtime. They certainly probably need a snack when they get home. They need a little downtime, and then they're going to do their homework. Or your child does better with a snack and then gets right to their homework, and then they have the evening free. And it's easier to create good habits when children are younger, because when you have teens, they just resist as much intervention as possible, and they really resist good habits. So the younger you can start with creating good habits, the better.
Yeah, okay. And we've talked about this before. You said also sometimes tying it to something they like. Let's say you're in a homework battle. You might have to step in and say, listen, this is when you do it. 6 to 7, otherwise you can't go skiing, or something like that, like tying it to something that they really like, maybe less pushback, and then they're getting that structure and that downtime.
It's okay to use reinforcers for behavior. We as adults use reinforcers, like I need to do this in the morning and then I can go for a walk at lunchtime, or then I can, do a little word game or something. It's okay to use reinforcers. Not everyone is internally motivated to do the right thing all the time. And the hope is that over time, when we practice being reinforced, then we develop some more internal motivation. There's some people that never develop internal motivation. So it's being realistic. It's okay to say, on a Saturday, or on an evening, right? You spend an hour doing your homework, or do your 30 minutes of reading, or whatever the activity is. And then we can do a puzzle together, or, it doesn't always have to be a, physical or food treat, but you can do some of those as well. We play a game of cards, or we read together. A lot of times when my kids were younger and if they had a hard time reading, I would say, okay, you're going to read for 15 minutes on your own, and then I'll read for 15 minutes with you. I'll read aloud. So you can build in some of those those rewards and reinforcers, because that helps with motivation.
So if you want to have this discussion with your kids, sometimes some kids are way more verbal and saying, I just can't do it. I can't do anymore, Mom. Like, I just don't want to go today or whatever. I guess that's pretty obvious. And okay, we have to dial it back. And maybe it's just for that day you let them stay home. But if you're just, maybe your kid's just going like adults do and not even questioning if they have too much, how would you suggest having this conversation?
Well, I would be concerned if you're getting a lot of pushback. And while I am a proponent of, if you start an activity, you need to finish the activity, sometimes those hard conversations are before you start the activity. And if you're on a sport or a team, you start it, you kind of need to finish it. But that's where, you push through the season and then you say, listen, you didn't want to go to practice or to, your activity many times. How about we not do this activity anymore? And the child says, no, I really want to do it. And I said, that's not what your behavior is telling me. So your words and your behavior are not matching. So it's sometimes they need a little push through, but it's when you get that active resistance, then I get concerned that this is just too much.
Yeah. And I guess at some point you want to teach them, like, if you have kids who come home and just say, I'm tired and I don't feel good and I don't want to do anything. And of course they get to their activity and they like it and they're so much better after, especially if it's a physical activity. I guess reinforcing like, hey, did you notice you felt so much better after you had a snack? I mean, I have that fight with my son all the time. Like, you're hungry. No, I'm not. And then they eat and they come alive. So I guess when they're younger, they don't know their feelings as much.
Yes. And so that's a beautiful example of helping your child, your younger child or your teen, helping your child or teen identify what's really going on. So as a parent, we have a lot of life experience, right? And we are good at picking up on patterns. And we know that, your child absolutely needs a snack when they get home from school, or absolutely needs a snack before a practice or a game or activity. But they also need that hour where they do nothing. And maybe they are on electronic, but I know they're on electronic, but then they're going to practice where they won't be on an electronic and they can just be more active. So it's really knowing your child, knowing when and how to push them, and helping them identify their emotional state or their feeling or the pattern for them. It always seems like you're hungry around 5 o'clock, even though you had a snack around 3 o'clock when you came home. You're identifying that pattern for them, and then that helps them learn more about themselves and eventually develop the skill of self-regulation.
So this is something that we have to be patient with. This is not a skill that, hey, I taught you that 3 times last week. Why are you still doing it?
So patience, I say parenting is the hardest job in the world. And that's probably because patience is a huge part of it. Patience, problem solving are huge parts of being a good enough parent. And yes, I told you 3 times last week that this is what I observe, or this is what the pattern is, or helped you identify this. But this new weekend it's as if I never said it at all. So it does require a lot of patience, because to learn a new routine actually takes a lot of time. You don't just make one change and then all of a sudden you do things differently. So it is continually pointing out the pattern and hoping that eventually it just sort of hooks in and they can do it on their own.
So when we're talking about leisure time, I think, even as adults, we tend to overdo it. And I know you've always talked about be the model, right? So if we're leading a crazy life where we work all day and then we're on a couple boards and then we're running around in the car and we're complaining that we never have downtime, is that also a problem for the kids to see that?
I do think that the modeling really is important. And then it is, at the dinner table saying, you know what, I ran myself ragged today. I'm going to, after dinner, after the, dishes are cleaned up, I'm just going to sit and read, or I'm just going to sit and watch a show. So you're kind of talking out loud about what the process is. But yes, your behaviors are speak louder than your words. So you have to show that then you are taking that downtime and cutting things back, and then or making up for it on the weekends where you're doing less. So your behaviors and your words need to match, but your behaviors often speak louder than your words.
In general, would you say that most families right now are just doing too much?
I think it's very individual. And And honestly, parenting's the hardest job in the world. Parents come from a place of wanting to do the right thing for themselves and for their families. I think we also need to remember that we came out of a 2.5, 3 year period like the world has never seen before. So, getting back into our routines and hoping that things stick and really trying to do the best thing that we can is important. But to give yourself a break, to give yourself the grace to make mistakes and to, correct those mistakes is the best thing that you can do for yourself.
You bring a good point with the pandemic. I think a lot of us, I've talked to a lot of my mom friends who said, oh, I'd like to go back to the COVID days when everything was canceled, because if they're working and then all of a sudden they're back in the car driving the kids everywhere. We have to think about ourselves too, right? I have a friend who's a doctor, and she decided, you know what, guys, I'm done with this. You guys can only do activities at your school. Because I'm not driving around like craziness all night long, every night, living in my car. Mommy's not happy, and if I'm not happy, I can't do this for my family. So we're talking about leisure time for our kids, but sometimes I think we sacrifice our own energy to make sure they get to do all the things they want to do.
Right, and in any of those things, there's somewhat of a balance. So there's never a pure balance. There's always fluctuating demands. But what I like about that example is it was communicated, right? Here's the issue. The problem is I, work hard all day and I need some downtime in the evenings. I can't be driving all around. So here's the problem. Here's my solution. If your child says, yes, but I really, really love choir practice, and choir practice is on Wednesday and Thursday evenings. Okay, we can do choir practice, but we can't do choir practice in soccer and lacrosse and all these other things. So it is about being open to the process, but communicating what the problem is, coming up with a solution, but then being open to some feedback as well.
And from the sports psychology perspective of it, a lot of kids are doing these extra teams. Say they're doing the school team and they're doing the travel teams and whatever, because there's some hope, even at a very young age, that they're going to play this sport in college and they're going to maybe get a scholarship. I know that may not be realistic a lot of times for families, but can you talk about the burnout too? Because you also hear that sometimes the kids have been so specialized, they've done so many teams, and they get to right around that age where it's going to matter, say 15, they're like, I don't want to do it anymore, and they want to quit. So is there essentially too much is going to perhaps lead to more burnout and be the problem with the result you're trying to get?
So that is a real thing, that those kids are overscheduled. I think any good coach or athletic person will tell you that hyper focusing on one sport is actually not the best thing. It is good to try a bunch of different sports and at least do cross training. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's very, very small. The amount of kids that go on to do college athletics is small, and the college athletes that go on to do something professionally is infinitesimal. However, what I like to think about in those situations is not hyper focusing on one sport and really developing your skills in that sport. It's what are the additional things? What are the other skills? What are the life lessons? What is the confidence building that you're gaining from that activity? So, you might really love soccer and you might want to be on the travel soccer team, but try outdoor track too, right? And if you don't like it, then don't do it again. But try to do some additional things that give you different exposure, not just exposure from a physical, muscular level, but exposure to different people and different expectations. So, it's the skills that you develop. It's not that your child's going to be a dancer and then become a professional dancer. It's the skills and that they're developing along the way. It's about body confidence. It's about self-worth. It's about relating to other people. It's about resilience and sticking with something. So it's really all the other skills that are much more valuable.
Right, and I'll just chime in here that my brother is a Olympic running coach. Well, now he is in the business of creating marathons, but has coached many Olympians. And he told me, he's like, you have to remember that the average Olympian is 28 years old. And many of the Olympians we've coached didn't even know they could run fast until someone told them in high school. And I interviewed a couple of Olympians who are here in Connecticut who have a son. When the son was 9, I'm like, oh gosh, 2 gold medal winners. What is your son doing? And like, town baseball. He's too young. He's just playing. So it's just the idea that if we do more, they're going to get more isn't supported by the evidence at all.
Right. And if you, that's a beautiful example. And so I'll give you my not personal example, but I'm a huge Purdue basketball fan, right? And their superstar, Zach Edey, didn't even start playing basketball until he was a sophomore in high school.
Yeah.
And then because he was playing hockey and he was playing other sports. So realize that this story is true for so many. Specializing on a sport at age 5 doesn't make you an Olympian at age 15. But it's all the other skills. It's all the other developmental tasks that you engage in. That's really more important than ever going on and doing something professionally or becoming a pro athlete.
So in our final 2 minutes, I just want to sum it up for folks that basically you want to think about some anchor events, something in the morning, something in the evening. If you have younger kids who get out of bed easier, maybe you're going to say, let's go out and play basketball before school. Teens, it might be a little harder. They want every moment to sleep. But some stuff in the morning, some stuff in the evening, and really taking a look at the schedule. And if your kid is always tired or not able to get up, having the courage to change it and dial it back and say, how does it feel if we do less?
Right. Really looking at your child's behavior, what's motivating them, what's not motivating them, where's the resistance, and then using that information to then, take some next steps to either dial things back or maybe in some situations, increasing a little bit of structure. But it's okay to use rewards and reinforcers.
With the final minute, we only have 1 minute left, but I was going to say it might be another conversation, but a lot of times kids would love to do all the activities, but they're falling behind in their studies. I know not everyone's meant to be a straight A student, but is it still okay to say academics come first?
Well, you need to have some kind of baseline, right? So if your child's just not a hugely academic person, they are much more of like a physically oriented person. But they need to still adopt the skills to be a decent student. You don't need to be an Albert Einstein, but you need basic skills to get through high school and maybe to get some kind of secondary education. And some of that is stamina, some of that is attention and concentration. And I know that's affected by other things as well. But even athletes need to have like a C average or above. You can't be failing out classes and do a sport. So we need to have some basic standards, and that might be striking a better balance.
Thank you, Dr. Laura Saunders, as always, for your wisdom and coming to us from the premier organization of the Institute of Living in Hartford, Connecticut. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Kara.
And if you want more information on the cutting edge of wellness, we're happy that you're here. You can follow me on social media. It's at Kara Sunderland. Please download the CURES podcast. Leave us a review. It helps support this great work. You can also join the CURES Facebook group. Thanks. Have a great day and be well.